Hi, this is Steve Michelotti of the Azure Government Engineering team. Today I'm joined by Joseph Bloom of Microsoft Business Productivity, as well as Paul Fisher of the Microsoft Modern App Solution Center. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks.
This is actually part 2 of a 2-part video where we are talking about setting up a secure development environment on Azure Government. In the first part, we talked about setting up that development environment. We set up our VPN connections, our VNets. We set up our secure environment, basically. In this part, Paul is going to show us how to use it.
Correct. As in the first part, we've set up the secure environment. In this part of the videos, we're going to actually create a build server, actually a pair of build servers. And we're going to run automated unit tests and integration tests, as well as deploy infrastructure to Docker containers during the run. This is to show how to actually use that secure VPN so that all of your resources are behind the secure firewall.
Okay, so you are using Docker even for things like SQL?
Correct. While there's other technologies that you could use for integration testing, such as SQL Azure, the goal of this example is to show how you can set up something in VSTS, run your automated build and integration testing, and then transfer it to a secondary environment for deployment, which may be a disconnected environment that doesn't have reach back into Azure or SQL Azure. The goal will be to create a pair of build servers that will run unit testing and integration testing inside of the VPN. In a production environment, you may have other machines where you'll run your integration testing. For this example, we're just going to use the build servers. However, the build servers will authenticate to Visual Studio Team Services, they will bring the code back, and they can run everything inside of the VPN security environment. You may have other pieces that you want to run outside of the security environment, but that's really by your choice. Your security concerns will dictate which pieces are allowed to be outside of the window that we created in part 1.
Okay, so you just cleared up a couple things for me. First off, one of the questions I had was why not use SQL Azure, but I think you just answered that. I can literally take this and put this anywhere I want. I could even deploy it into a classified environment.
Absolutely. When I'm done, in the example that you see, the builds that run in VSTS can be run almost identically in an on-premises TFS.
Okay. The other thing I find interesting about this diagram is we think of VSTS, Visual Studio Team Services, as something running in the cloud, a SaaS model. But in this case, we're actually pulling the build down to our secure environment. We're running the builds not up in some cloud somewhere, but in our secure environment.
Correct. By default, Visual Studio Team Services will run in a hosted environment that's hosted by Visual Studio Team Services. However, once you set up your VPN network and your secure environment, your integration tests could take quite a while.
Yeah.
And the whole discussion that we had when we were working on this was, well, if you're running these long-term integration tests, is the code vulnerable while it's being built? I mean, if your integration tests take an hour or two, what occurs during that time? And so the answer that we came up with is, well, the best thing we'd be able to do is to bring everything into your VPN and run your integration tests there. This way you don't care if they run for 1 hour, 2 hours, or 6 hours. Nobody without VPN access can access the build while it's running.
They're going to be in that secure environment in
Correct.
Azure Government. I also noticed you have a pair of build servers. Why do we have 2 here instead of just 1?
So we're going to build the build servers in an availability group. So an availability group is an Azure construct whereby if certain machines are taken down for maintenance or other things inside the cluster, Azure guarantees that the other one will not be taken down for maintenance at the same time. So by putting them in an availability group, you'll always have a build server whenever you need it.
Okay, sounds good. So what's the first step here?
All right, well, the first step is create the build servers. All right, so here we are in my Microsoft Azure for Government dashboard. So I have logged into my account using dual-factor authentication, which I strongly suggest that everybody does. And I actually logged in using my Microsoft Authenticator app on my phone. Okay. So now I'm into the dashboard environment. I'm going to just create my build servers. So I'm going to go over and I'm going to click on all resources. And I'm going to search for Visual Studio. Now, the build servers running out of VSTS run VS Test as the test engine. And they require Visual Studio to be on the build servers. I'm going to use a Server 2016 instance that already has Visual Studio installed. But even if you installed it separately, it would end up being about the same thing.
Okay. So here we are installing this for the purpose of running the build server builds.
It will run the builds, it will run the unit tests, and it will run the integration tests all automatically.
Awesome.
And then you can take this and you can use this as a check-in build so that every time one of the developers has code that's ready to be brought into the master baseline, this can be run automatically and all of your tests can be run and the code can be checked out. This is a really good way to stop defects before they infect the rest of your baseline.
Sounds good. Kind of a standard CI/CD pipeline.
Yes. So I'm just creating a machine, and there's nothing particularly special about this at this point. It's just a regular old VM.
All right, so here we're just getting an example of how easy it is to set up a VM. We can do this on the command line or in the portal, but here we are just doing it in the portal, filling out a couple of text boxes.
Correct. So I put in a new resource group. I've created a password or username. I've given the machine a name. It's then going to ask me to choose a size. Now, the size that you'll want will depend on exactly how many builds you're going to have and if you're going to do integration testing on the machine or versus another machine. I'll just pick the default size for now, but really, each of the machines lists the amount of RAM available and the number of data disks you can have, and so you can scale this up to whatever size you need.
Okay.
Now here I'm going to bring it into an availability group, and so both machines are going to get the same availability group. So like I said, this will make sure that one of the machines is always available 24/7 for you to use.
Yep.
I'm going to set only 2 update domains because I'm only going to have 2 machines. Okay, so now I'm going to pick a virtual network. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick of the virtual network that Joe set up in part 1 of this video, that is the VPN network. That will give me a default subnet, which is what I want because that's what we did in part 1 of these videos. The key thing that I wanted to go down this road on the screen is to show you that for public IP address, we are going to make sure that there is no public IP address connected. That's because once you're connected to the VPN, your local machine that you're connected with and all of the machines in the VPN in Azure are speak only through their private IP addresses.
Right.
If you were to put a public IP address on the machine, you would skirt all of the VPN functionality and you would have no security at all.
Yeah.
So in order to do this, we make sure that the machines have no public IP address.
Great, so completely locked down here.
And then I'd pick a network security group and I'd click OK. Now, in reality, this would have to build, and then I have to build the second machine. So I'm going to switch over to a pair of machines that I already built.
Great.
In order so that we can continue on. So the first thing I'm going to do actually is I'm going to go to my VPN that we set up earlier, and I'm going to connect with my certificate that I was given.
Okay, so this is the certificate that we got from Azure that we saw Joe demonstrate in the previous video, and here we are connected to our secure development environment.
Absolutely. So once this is logged in, then this machine here will be part of the private network in Azure that we created in part 1.
Awesome.
And we are connected. So now I can come over here to open one of my machines. And now that I'm connected, it will just ask me to log in just like regular old RDP.
So you are remoting into a development machine or the build server?
Into a build server.
Okay.
But it's really the same thing effectively. It's a machine running in the single
Same
subnet
VNet.
in Azure.
Yeah,
Okay. So here I am. I'm on the build server. And there's 5 things that we need in order to get this accomplished today. The first is Visual Studio. And like I said, I'm using a template that has Visual Studio installed. Or if you want, you could install Visual Studio after you end up in the same place. The second thing I need is Docker. Docker doesn't come by default in Windows 2016, but it can be installed through PowerShell. That takes a little while, so I've already done that in this case. I do want to show, however, something that's important is that when you install Docker, by default, it's going to install with a NAT network. The NAT network is great, and there's no problems. However, each machine by default is going to get a different internal subnet for Docker. What you want to do, because we're going to have one single build, is you want both machines to have the same internal subnets. There's many ways to launch Docker, but if you launch Docker just through the regular Docker run command, you're going to want to specify the IP address that your SQL server is running on.
Okay.
In order for each build to have the same IP address for that SQL server, depending on which build server actually picks up your build, you want them to be addressed the same. And I'm going to show you how to do that right now.
Okay, great.
Okay, so here I'm going to launch PowerShell in order to change the Docker network. And I'm going to do this as an administrator because Docker only runs as an administrator. You can see Docker is running on this machine.
All right, so you've already got Docker installed.
I've already got
Everything's
Docker
good
installed.
to go there. Yep.
So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to check the container network. And it's telling me that my container network is using an internal subnet of 192.168.224. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to copy that value. And I'm going to put it outside of my machine. I'm just going to put it into Notepad. Because what we're going to do is now we're going to go onto the other machine in the group, and we're going to change that subnet to match this subnet. Okay, so here we're on this other machine. We're going to go into an administrative console.
This is the other build machine?
This is the other build machine
Okay.
in the pair. Because what they do is they both have Docker installed, but they have different internal subnets.
Yes.
Right. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the Docker service. And then I'm going to remove the container network. Now, since this machine was just installed, it only has one container network, so I don't need to look and see what container network it is. It will install the default container network that Docker installed when it was installed. Okay, and then I'm going to open up trusty Notepad as an administrator. And I'm going to enter the configuration for a static subnet. And here, I'm going to take the subnet that I took from the first machine and I'm going to apply it to the second machine. And that should be good. We're going to save this as which is one of the main configuration files of Docker, but since it was a new Docker installation, it was not there yet. Now we go back to our PowerShell script and we go back, we restart the Docker service and we get the container network and we see that the container network not matches what is on the other machine. So now both of these machines have two specific subnets on each machine that match. Then when we run one build, it can go to either servers. Okay. So now that we have Docker all set up, so now one build can run on either of the build servers. The next thing we need is the VSTS agent. The VSTS agent runs and it actually pulls out to VSTS in order to pull down the source code and run the builds and the tests. This is how it works very securely because VSTS never gets credentials into the VPN. The VPN has credentials into VSTS. And this is accomplished through a PAT token. So I'm going to show you how to get the agent and get the PAT token. So we're going to go to VSTS. Now this is a private VSTS account that I'm using where I disabled dual factor authentication just for this demo, but I highly recommend that people do not do that and they always access VSTS through dual factor authentication, which would cause logging in to ring their phone or whatever they're using for the dual factor. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to the agent pools. And right away, it tells me, here's where I can download my agent. So I'm going to download the agent. And it will actually give me instructions on how to download the agent. I'm going to follow these here. But we're going to download the package. We'll save it. Now, while that's running, you'll see that there are already some agent pools listed on this. These are for other machines that are using the same VSTS. So you can have any number of build servers and you can have any number of agents running on a build server. So depending on the capacity that you need in your environment, VSTS will fully support it. Okay, that has been downloaded. And now I'm going to close this and we're going to come over here to File Explorer. And we're going to create a directory called agent. And then I'm going to go into my downloads folder where I've just downloaded it. I'm going to copy all of that into my new folder called agent.
Okay, so we have downloaded the agent from VSTS onto the machine we want to act as our build server. You're copying the files over, still in preparation for actually running this agent.
Correct.
All right.
Okay, so now that the agent is copied, before we start the agent installation, we're going to go to VSTS and get our PAT key. So the PAT key can be gotten if you go to your name, the little icon for your name, and you click on security. It'll bring you to the personal access tokens page. So what we want to do is we want to add a PAT key. We're going to type a description, and we'll just call this today's demo key. We pick our expiration. The pats can be good for up to a year. And then we will pick the scope that we want it in. The minimal scope that this needs in order to run a build agent is agent pools read and manage. So we will then create the token. The token will appear on this page. Now it's important at this point that you copy this token because you cannot regenerate the same key again from the page. And once we leave this web page, the key will actually be gone. The key is given by VSTS, so we can actually take this key and apply it to multiple agents. Like it's basically giving the agent permission to attach to VSTS. So once you take one pat key, you can put that pat key to multiple agents, or you can create a new pat key for each agent, however you want to do it. We'll save this into Notepad for now. Okay.
Okay, so what do you do when the pat token expires?
When the pat token expires, you'll have to go back into VSTS and just generate another one.
Okay.
You can easily remove the agent and reinstall it. The whole process takes about 5 minutes.
All right, cool.
So let me show you how to install the agent. So here we are. We're going to go to the agent directory. And we're going to install the agent. And it's going to ask us for the URL of VSTS that I was just on. And it's going to default to PAT authentication, which is what I want. Here's where we will copy the PAT token into the installation. Now it's going to ask you for an agent pool. An agent pool, you could have multiple different pools that run different build agents. We're just going to use the default pool. And it asks for an agent name. And so I'm going to call this my demo agent. It's asking for a work folder. I'll just hit the default for this. And it wants to know if we want to run the agent as a service. We do. So I'll click yes. And now it's going to ask for a user account. In a production system, you'd probably want a service account to run this. Right now, I'm just going to use me to run this. And there you go. Our agent is now installed. Now, if we go back to Visual Studio Team Services, and we go back to the agent pools page, you'll see now I now have a third agent, right? This is the one that we just installed. So this is now ready. And if you went to a build, the build would be picked up and by one of these three would run. The other things we need on the machine in order to run is we need a Docker container with SQL Server on it. Lots of times during our own engagements, we actually build the containers as we go. So the build steps will run, build a container, and then use that for testing. SQL Server takes a bit of time to build, and so since it doesn't really change, it's easier to just have it around. And we also need the Microsoft SQL Server Command Tools package because in the build on the fly, we're going to install a database using SQL Command, and SQL Command is deployed with that package. So for this, I actually have two other machines already set up as build servers that have all the pieces. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to disable the demo agent because we don't want any builds to be picked up by the one that's only half built. And we're going to go and I'm going to show you how the build actually runs.
Okay.
So if I go to projects, and it's called build and test, and if I go to build and release, I have a single build. And let's just walk through it really quickly. You'll see at the top of the build, I just remove any old Docker containers and I build the solution. This will build all of the code, make sure it builds cleanly, and it will build the database, which will create a database installation script. I then run my unit tests, because the first thing you want to do before you run integration tests is just make sure that your code compiles and runs and all the unit tests run as you think. Unit testing normally is much quicker than integration testing, so if the build's going to fail, you'd want it to fail quickly. After that, we're going to copy the SQL files from where they've been built into where we need them to be in order to deploy through SQL command. Then we're going to run the SQL container. I'm just using Docker run inside of a build step for Docker. I'm actually giving the container an IP address, so the container will always come up with the same IP address. I do sleep for 75 seconds after this because we've noticed that SQL Server, after the container comes up, takes about a minute to become available. So this is just a built-in wait that we need to do. After that, we're going to deploy the database. There is a step here where we have a configuration file for the integration test solution, which is on the machine already. And so we're going to copy that over the configuration file that came out of this code baseline. Then we're going to run our integration tests. They run, they're successful, the containers are destroyed, the database is deleted, and we're done, and presumably we have perfect testing. Running this is very easy. I'll just come over here and I click Queue. It says that my build has been queued. And the build is just running.
Okay, so we've gotten the build actually building in Azure Government rather than up on VSTS, and it's building in our secure development environment.
Correct.
Okay, cool. So to summarize what we've done here, we have this 2 parts of the video series. In the first part, we set up the secure development environment, which included our developer workstations, as well as the VNet that we need to run the builds. In the second video here, you've walked us through actually setting up the builds. So we've installed our VSTS agents in Azure Government. So the builds have actually run not on public VSTS, but actually inside of Azure Government in our secure development environment.
Correct.
Okay, great. This has been Steve Michelotti with Joseph Bloom and Paul Fisher talking about setting up a secure environment in Azure Government. Thanks for watching.